Hello everyone, Ian here with Sanctum of the Craft's ongoing course on Crisis Preparedness. Today is one of the classes that I teach. I am trying to do this concurrently for our live students and our YouTube audience. We'll see how it works. And I am talking today about Infosec, which is short for information security. This is a much bigger deal now than it was 20 years ago. Or at least it's much more pervasive. So, what is Infosec? Why do we care? What am I talking about? The idea of information security is basically that, one, you have some right to privacy and some reasonable expectation of privacy. I will ignore the fact that when I was growing up and the internet was a new thing, we were told that you should assume that anything you say online is not private, despite the fact that it is still good advice. There is some level of expectation of privacy in life in general, and even on the internet, especially as it becomes a larger part of people's lives. And two, there is information that you may not want shared, whether that is where you live, what your phone number is, how to find you, what you are doing, any of these things. So the first big concept that I'm going to talk about is threat modeling, because taken to its extreme, a concern with InfoSec leads to the scene from an early aughts movie where you have someone living in a lobster cage that's actually a Faraday cage and wearing a tinfoil hat and not connecting to any network or going outside ever. Let's avoid that. The first big concern is threat modeling. This is the idea that you need to work out possible adversaries, that is the term that is used in this case, or possible actors, and their possible actions. It's like the first part of a game of Mad Libs. Am I worried about being found by my stalker and having them follow me home and potentially be a physical threat? Am I worried about the cops knowing when the protest that I am planning is going to be? Am I worried about the Proud Boys knowing when the protest that I am planning is going to be? Am I worried about the FBI finding out what I'm doing? I'm not doing anything illegal. All of these require very different approaches to keeping the information secure from the adversary or actor or threat actor. I'm going to stick with threat actor in this case. So it's sort of like a Mad Libs game. Blank will do blank. Threat actor will discover this information. You then get into analysis of the threat. What? We just covered that. So what? And now what? I like this because it is a very helpful mnemonic that is very easy to remember. And in case you have not done advanced scenario planning, like so many people haven't, having something that is easy to remember is incredibly helpful. So, we're playing Mad Libs. And I'm trying very hard not to make a Blue Eye Samurai reference. I just want you all to know that. Threat actor has compromised data, that's the what, which results in consequences. Therefore, I will remediation steps. Okay? So I'm going to step through a couple of sample ones. Let's go with the stalker. I know so many people who have an ex who has stalked them or threatened them or harassed them. So, my stalker could find out where I live or where I work and come and be a threat to my physical well-being. If this happens, what are your remediation steps? You have the legal ones. You could get a restraining order. You could report this person for stalking and harassment. That does not help you very much when they show up with a knife. So you could engage in self-defense training of one form or another, carry mace. You start getting into people who will tell you to do concealed carry. That's really only useful if you are going to do significant training, spend significant money, and also take the necessary psychological steps to actually be willing to shoot a person. So I actually don't really recommend that one for most people, but that's another story. There are the restraining order isn't helping me, the police aren't helping me, and I'm not actually willing to shoot this person, but they're willing to stab me. Remediation steps of leaving that job or moving, those are pretty extreme. Or there's the scary dog privileges remediation step of have someone else deliver a sufficiently appropriate threat. These are all options. I'm not necessarily advocating one over the other, but this is sort of the game that we're playing. This is information, this is who could get it, this is what could go wrong, this is how you can fix it. You will note that by and large, the reason this becomes concerning is that the remediation steps are much more extreme than you would necessarily think that they would be for the information leak. So, let's talk about that's a single stalker. Let's talk about the other extreme. Let's say that the FBI is surveilling you because you are a labor organizer or you are involved in civil rights demonstrations, and the FBI has, in fact, in declassified documents, admitted to surveilling both of these types of individuals. So, the good news is the FBI is less likely to stab you than your stalker. I cannot believe I just had to say that out loud. So, this is the what are you trying to keep secret from them and what will happen if they find it section, right? In the case of the FBI, what they're trying to find is you doing anything illegal. So, your best option is to be scrupulously sure that you're not doing anything illegal, because it's going to be very hard to prevent them from getting to that data. We're going to talk a little bit more about this when we're talking about things you can do to make your information harder to get, to protect it, to secure your information. Yeah. But they have a lot of resources. They can probably get to most things, especially most things that you are doing using electronic devices or long-distance telecommunications or electronic communication. The consequences in that case are mostly going to be involving the legal system, right? The FBI collects data and builds a case against you, historically speaking. We'll come back to that in just a second. How can you fix it is, well, it's hard to do in that particular scenario, because if they have actually gotten evidence that you did something wrong that they think is sufficiently admissible in court, then your defense is hire a really good attorney. So these are sort of extreme versions in a couple of ways. A person with very few resources for which maybe your recourses are legal, versus an organization with an awful lot of resources against whom your recourses are legal In the first case, the legal recourses were not going to help you very much, so you should look into alternatives. In this case, the legal recourses are most of what you have if you get to the point where it actually matters. This is why the so what is incredibly important, by the way. If the FBI is surveilling you and you're not doing anything illegal, then historically speaking, in the majority of cases, the so what was not threats to your person. Now, it could be threats to your movement, threats to your organization, threats to your plan, because then we start getting into the idea of operational security versus information security. Operation security is where you have a specific thing that you are doing that you are trying to make sure goes off without being interrupted. In cases of labor organization or civil rights protests, one of the things that the FBI, again, this is a matter of publicly classified record, has done and will do is slip people into the organization doing the planning to do counterintelligence operations, to run procedural sabotage, to, well, there is the declassified CIA field manual for simple sabotage. If any of you are looking for resources on malicious compliance and or how to disrupt a movement that you are appearing to be part of, I highly recommend that reading. But the fact of the matter is, these are tactics that the CIA knew worked because they and the FBI have been using them for decades by that point. And the FBI has never really stopped using them domestically. So, in the case of a given operation, a given protest, a different organizing goal, there may be consequences to information of who's doing what where leaking out. In the case of your personal safety, less so. So, what is the risk and what do I have to do to protect it, and what's the time frame in which it matters? By definition, if you are organizing a protest, and I'm using this one example a lot right now for what I feel to be obvious reasons, when it's happening, you want everyone to know. That's the point of a protest. If no one knows that a protest is actively going on, it is not effective. So, any information leaks that you are concerned about in the lead up to a protest to do with where and who and when suddenly become irrelevant. You only have to keep them contained for a short period of time, or at least you have a fixed end time, which makes a lot of this much more doable. Since I brought it up, I will also bring up the notion of security consciousness, which is much more relevant to operational security than information security, but does still apply. Basically, security consciousness is this idea that everything you do in connection with an operation or an organizing goal is distributed only on a need-to-know basis. Everyone finds out what they need to know, when they need to know it. You trust the people who are doing the organizing to know what they're doing and have done the homework. And that means that a lot of the time with this type of organizing, if someone who maybe hasn't been thoroughly vetted gets into an organization that is planning something, they don't actually know about it until it's happening. And so there's not a lot they can do. They can only leak what they know. And if they don't know until it's happening, hey boss, it's happening, great, they want us to know now anyway. The whole point is attention. So, security consciousness is mostly a topic for another day. I can go into it then if people would like me to. We can schedule another class, that's fine. But I bring it up now because there is something under threat modeling that I am forced to bring up in the current climate. Life as an op, what to do if the threat is everywhere and every when. The thing is, I am of the firm position that borders are imaginary lines drawn on a map, that no human being is illegal, that everyone has the right to exist. We can talk about the paradox of tolerance and the right to act in certain ways also another time. There are people in positions of high authority at this time who do not share those same positions. Therefore, there are people who may be deemed illegal or not to have the right to exist, which means that the information that they want to conceal is that they exist, where they are, when they are there, or that they are in that class of people. And there is information that they have to keep concealed until such time, basically at all times, or in the case of where and when they are somewhere, until it is in the past. And even then, it may still pose problems. We'll come back to that later. I do not have an answer for those people. None of this is a silver bullet. None of this is a quick fix. None of this can fix all of those problems. The best I can do in those circumstances is give you information to make yourself harder to catch, harder to find that information on, harder to find your location at a given time, harder to pin stuff on. The fact of the matter is, I would like to bring up a period of American history known as the Red Scare. Some of you may be familiar with the term McCarthyism. For those who are not, Senator McCarthy ran a Committee on Un-American Activities, where, despite having no real legal authority to do so, he would bring in people on congressional subpoenas, accuse them of activities that were un-American, roast them publicly for having communist leanings or socialist leanings, despite having no clear definition of what communist or socialist meant other than things that McCarthy did not like. And if you were brought before this community and outed, you were blackballed. Because no one wanted to be the next person targeted. There is notably a journalist who did not defer to that position. I highly recommend the film Good Night and Good Luck for those curious about forms of resistance that people can do, walking a very delicate line. But the fact of the matter is, if we find ourselves in a position where there are people who may or may not have the legal authority to do so, who are able to call someone up and destroy their life by accusing them, without any due process, without any rule of law, then what you are trying to do in opposition is one of two things, or both at once. First, help the people who are at the top of the list and who are being called up. Hide them, get them out, do what you can. You don't have to be performing heroic rescues. Most people aren't, but there are still other ways you can help. Those will mostly not be the subject of this particular class. However, we will get to them at various points during this course. Second, your goal is to, outside of very specific and unusual circumstances, which not getting into the when to make yourself a martyr conversation is way beyond the scope of Infosec, keep yourself off the top of that list. The fact of the matter is, while it is not completely true that once something is on the internet it is there forever, all of our social media posts basically are. So if at any point in time you have complained about someone who gains power under an administration, whether they should have it or not, according to the rule of law, and they are a person in charge of such a committee or similar, that information is available. You're on the list. As soon as they decide to look, it's there. So don't be at the top. Keep the things that are immediate, oh, this is drawing my attention to this person, from getting to the people whose attention you are trying to avoid drawing. This class is mostly about that. It is mostly about mitigation. Let's start with your data, all of your data. You have an enormous amount of data. You have it in your brain, you have it in your journal if you're keeping one, you have it in your desk drawers, you have it on your electronic devices. You have a lot of it on your electronic devices. Partially because of that, and because we do in fact live in the age of information, a lot of which is powered by electronic devices, a lot of this class is going, and because of my personal areas of expertise, a lot of this class is going to touch on electronic devices. Things that someone may wish to get from your electronic devices range from your bank login details. Do you do online banking? Do you want other people not to have access to that, to the information of how to log into your bank account and transfer money from it? Then you have something that you would like to protect on your electronic devices. Do you have personal conversations you would prefer that everyone not be privy to? That's reasonable. However, you also now have reasons to not want people to get access to the information on your electronic devices. Do you have employment information, your social security information, digitized copies of your birth certificate, marriage license? These are all things that we have told you you should digitize in previous classes, and I stand by that, but you want to keep them protected because other people with access to those can do a lot of damage to you financially, personally, in terms of reputation, in terms of getting your house foreclosed on, in terms of lots of problems. You get the idea. So the first and most basic step to protecting your electronic data at rest, meaning when it is not in communication, it is not moving around a network, it's just sitting there on your device, is to encrypt your devices. Most computers, most smartphones, many tablets all have security options. Apple actually does this by default on their devices. Android users will have to find and turn on the security setting that says encrypt my entire device. Windows has options that you can find to do it. I do not remember the exact path, but when I post notes and provide handouts for this class, it will be in there. And what encrypting it means is that someone getting their hands on the physical device then has to decrypt it. They have to go through an extended and difficult process to be able to understand or make use of anything on that device. Of course, this is useless if they can just open it and turn it on. This means that you want to use a password. You probably want to use a fairly strong password or more likely passphrase. I am not going to get into the mathematics of why passphrases, where you put together a string of words that you will remember, tend to be more secure than a password that requires a numeral and a character in it. There is an XKCD that famously lists correct horse battery staple as a passphrase. Easy to remember, you've already memorized it. Difficulty for a computer to guess with conventional brute force decryption. It will basically never happen. There are a couple of caveats to this. Encrypting your devices will not stop someone like the NSA. If there is a government security agency trying to get access to your data, you have a different problem. And if there is data that you cannot allow them to have, there is a different answer. We'll get to that. If you write down your password, for example, on a sticky note underneath your computer, it's not very useful. Because if I happen to have your computer, I broke into your house, I'm looking at it, and I lift it up and see the password, I can now get in. If you tell someone your password, I hope you trust them with whatever that password is protecting, and that will continue to be the case. If it's not, change it. One that I'm gonna not go into a ton of detail on, but that is relevant, is the problem of password reuse. It's very easy, relatively speaking, for a hostile actor or a threat actor who is organized to set up a new app that's an image sharing app, and it's free. You don't have to sign up with any big data company. This claims it's privacy focused. They can be lying, but they say they are. You sign up and use the same password you use for everything. Well, if that was a threat actor and not a privacy focused video sharing app, they now know that email address or username and that password, or they can. Reputable secure apps do not actually know what your password is. They never have access to it unencrypted. But one, mistakes can happen, and two, threat actors are by definition not reasonable and reasonably secure and reputable. The other big one is biometric unlocks. If you are worried about any information on your electronic device being accessed at any point by law enforcement, do not use biometric unlocks on it. Your password is considered speech and is at this time protected by the First Amendment and or Fifth Amendment. Different lawyers have argued differently on that. Your fingerprints belong to the cops. They're allowed to take them. That's been established for a long time. You can't just say, no, you can't fingerprint me. Which means they can run your fingerprint over your phone's fingerprint sensor and be in it and see whatever you didn't want them to see. Turn off your biometric identification. It's not your friend. Other tips for protecting your data at rest in general. Anything that is storing data in the cloud is only as secure as every service that is making use of. And believe me when I tell you, that's a lot of services. Some of these data leaks and data breaches are happening because companies had a backup somewhere stored in an Amazon Web Service cloud account and there was just a non-encrypted copy of their database in a free Amazon Web Service account with inadequate protections, and someone just slurped it off of there and created a giant data breach. Anything you really want to stay secure, do not put in cloud storage. It is worth noting that if you are going to store something not on a local device, but on a server somewhere that's not technically in the cloud, but that, like, you've set up your own file sharing server, you've set up your own Mastodon server. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. You've set up something with a series of classes that you're pretty sure are going to have content that's going to become illegal in the country that you're in, and you want it stored on a server. There are countries that share information with each other. The Five Eyes in particular, the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada will basically share anything on any digital device in any jurisdiction with each other. Therefore, we have... Yes. Okay. I was going to say, is there an update to that I'm unaware of?
I said, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Government intelligence sharing over digital assets is absolutely a thing. Therefore, if you're going to set up something like that, I recommend something like Hostinger, whose services are in Eastern Europe in countries that do not have information sharing agreements with any of the Five Eyes nations, to pick an example completely at random. This does not apply to the vast majority of you, and if it does apply to you, then you should already know everything I'm talking about in this class. There is something that exists that is called Pegasus. It is basically the perfect malware. It is zero-click, meaning you don't have to do anything wrong, you don't have to download anything, you don't have to click on a phishing link, nothing. It goes in through security vulnerabilities in device operating systems that the company, which is an Israeli firm, refuses to tell the device manufacturers and programmers about. They sell it to governments, and it can record basically anything on your electronic device. It may not be admissible in court. They probably didn't have a warrant to use this. It is classified as malware. But multiple governments have been found using this against devices known to be associated with journalists, with certain military personnel, with whistleblowers. So if you happen to be on the list of people who a government might really, really want to know things about, it is possible that any given device you have is compromised, and you should treat it as such. This is not something that is just deployed en masse. Currently, if I ever hear rumors that it is, I will let everyone know through every channel that I have access to. Okay. That's protecting your electronic data at rest. I am not going to focus on protecting your non-electronic data at rest. However, we have talked about before in this class having a folder containing basically everything in paper that someone needs to steal your identity and making it highly visible in case your house burns down. I recommend that you put that somewhere that is not obvious. Don't put it in your desk. Don't put it in your wall safe. Put it in your sock drawer. Put it, like, under the slats of your bed, between the slats and the mattress. Put it somewhere you know and you can grab it really easily, but that if a burglar breaks into your house and doesn't know that they have more than 5 minutes before you're going to be home, they won't immediately look there. Securing your data in motion. Okay, this is information that is moving around. This is either information that you are communicating to someone, or that you are transferring between devices. If you are transferring data between devices, I highly recommend just using physical access, just like take a thumb drive or SD card or a micro SD card and put it into one device, transfer the files, and put it into the other one. Failing that, if it's someone who lives very far away, or if you're going for mass distribution, there are other methods that you can use. The biggest thing that you're looking for is something called end-to-end encryption. What this means is that whatever you're sending is encrypted on your local device, it is transmitted in that encrypted form, and then it is decrypted on the other person's local device. At no point should any intermediary service, such as whatever software you're using to do the file transfer, have access to an unencrypted version of this. Please note that there are some loopholes. For example, Facebook Messenger is now billing itself as being end-to-end encrypted. They do not promise that they don't have a copy of the decryption key. So, I would not trust that Mark Zuckerberg cannot see every single one of your sexting with your ex messages, but I don't think he cares.
Meta has already sold our information to Cambridge Analytica. So
Yeah, that's also true. Meta has sold not only your metadata, but also your personal data to firms such as Cambridge Analytica. There are tons of loopholes in their end user license agreement. I would absolutely not trust that at all. But you're looking for something that is end-to-end encrypted, and that doesn't store your whatever you're sending, or doesn't keep a copy, unless it's specifically intended as like a centralized file transfer service. Bit of an edge case, and not what I'm really focusing on. When you are sending a message over a network, it has to travel through whatever your gateway to the network is. If you're on cellular data, it is going, or a satellite connection for that matter, it is going from your device to a cell tower through the cell network to another device. So, you always need to ask what the cell tower has access to and do you trust them. If you're connected to a wireless network or a wired network, then it goes from your device to you out through your generally modem of one form or another to your internet service provider, and then from there it goes into the greater network. So the question is, what can your internet service provider see? If it is encrypted, they can see the metadata. We're going to talk a lot about metadata in a little bit, or possibly in class 2, because I'm taking a while. There's a lot to cover, sorry. But they can see the information about the message. Depending on exactly what this is and how you're transmitting it, that may be as little as something went across the internet, I have no idea what. Or as much as this person sent a text message to this other person and it said this. Your standard text messages aren't encrypted at all. They have a full log. They keep one. This is not news. Not currently. Most wireless companies refuse to provide the list of your unencrypted text messages without a warrant. I wouldn't necessarily count on that continuing.
I just witnessed that, where a person came in and was like, I need all of my text messages printed up, and Verizon was like, we can't do that.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I own the line. And they were like, we still can't do that. We literally don't have access to that information in store without a warrant.
Yeah. So what was said off camera is that this is something that Akimo witnessed recently at a Verizon store where someone needed access to their own text message record in printout form and was told that they could not receive it from anyone in the store without a judicial warrant. However, the reason I say I wouldn't count on that is that there is someone in Verizon's IT department who does have the access to just print that off. You don't know who they are, you don't know what they think, you don't know what they think of you. You don't know if they are willing to obey in advance. So, I wouldn't count on it. Another thing that's important to note is if what would give you away, if the information you want to prevent from being accessed is that you were here and connected to a network, you're in trouble. That information, one, is always logged, and two, is always available with a judicial warrant. Whether it's available with that one is another question. In addition, you need to be aware of something called a man-in-the-middle attack for a couple of reasons. Okay, a man-in-the-middle attack is basically your device is here, the network is here. I'll use a pineapple as an example. A pineapple is a device that creates a wireless network that plugs into an Ethernet port, just like your wireless router at home. The only difference is it keeps a record of everything that's going through it. And there's someone else who's watching that or who's going to do something with the log. So in the case of, for example, public airport Wi-Fi, it's possible that someone is either watching it without one of these, or that someone has set one of these up somewhere. It's more likely that someone is packet sniffing than that someone is using a pineapple, but that's also a similar concept. Basically, the idea is that anything unencrypted that you send over a network that you are not already familiar with, you should probably assume that whatever the encrypted data is can be read too. There's also something called a stingray, which is like that but for cell phone towers that cops have access to and can set up. And so if, for example, they want to know everyone that's going to be at a protest and they set up a stingray and everyone who had their cell phone connect to cellular service while they were at that protest had their number logged on the stingray as connecting to cellular service in this area. They don't actually have that big of a geographical area that they cover, and suddenly there's a list. So, be aware of that. If that is something that you want to avoid, I will get more into this in the section on metadata. However, you should be aware now, in case this is the only thing that you see, that the NSA has publicly stated that it has the ability to tell what the latest cell phone tower your phone was connected to, or GPS signal that your phone is connected to, or where it is even when the device is turned off, and they've been able to for a decade. They've been acknowledging this for a decade. So turning your phone off doesn't mean that if a government agency or a government intelligence agency is trying to track your location with a phone number that they know is affiliated with you, they can still do that. In terms of, I will have some specific recommendations on tools to use for transmitting information that are sort of best in class at sending encrypted messages and not obeying and not being able to give out information even when they have to. I'll spoil something. Signal is kind of the gold standard, despite a recent metadata exploit that I'll get to when I'm talking about it. But I will have specific recommendations. In general, when you are communicating, again, data in motion, generally we're talking about communication, the most secure method of communication is always in person. I now have to put more caveats on this than I used to. They used to say that we were paranoid when we said that everything with a microphone should always be treated as though it's recording. It has now been admitted that everything with a microphone is always recording.
I remember the last time we taught this. We told people my advice that I always say, which I assume you're about to tell everyone.
Yeah.
And we had students say, no. They've said it's not listening. It's using like an algorithm to predict things.
Right. So, for those who can't hear from off camera, the last time we taught this class, we talked about this, and people said, no, it's not. They've said that they're not listening all the time, and that the reason that when you say something you immediately see targeted ads for it isn't because they're listening, it's because they're collecting enormous amounts of data about you at all times, along with everyone you're in proximity to, from things that aren't audio communication. And so they know what products you're going to be talking about and potentially looking up before you mention them. Somehow this was less creepy.
Right, that was supposed to be better.
That was supposed to be better. It has since been acknowledged that they were doing that. And there is no evidence that they have stopped. The nebulous they, in this case, being, let's start with whoever owns the smart assistant on your device. If you've ever said, hey Siri, and had it turn on, that means that it's listening to your audio. It's listening for those specific words, sure. What else is it listening for? So, our general advice when communicating in person is that you take your devices that have a microphone, for example, your cell phones, and you sit them in front of your other devices with microphones, like your laptops, and play a movie on it. The cell phones hear that you're listening to a movie. The computer knows that you're watching a movie and listening to it. You can be off in the other room with no devices, with no recording devices, not watching the movie, having an actually private conversation. Don't do it in a room where your smart speaker is or your smart home assistant, but you give them data. Give them this thing over here. Go have the private conversation over here. Yes, their private physical conversations can be eavesdropped on. You probably want to pay attention to who's around you. Yes, physical conversations can have a shotgun mic pointed at the glass of your window, recording the audio based on its vibrations.
That has been found to be a lot harder to do if you are in the central room of a house.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. You can not be near a window. If you are in a room without windows, although I'm aware that a lot of you don't have one, pretend that you're all having shower sex. But like, I'm aware that in a modern apartment, there may not be a room without windows, but if you go into an interior room, getting audio recordings through layers of building is a lot harder than through a window. But also, most of the time, you probably don't merit a full surveillance package with a shotgun mic. Again, if you do, you should already know more than I'm covering in this class. Other methods of communication. Email is not designed for security. It's just not. Nothing you say in an email is secure. Sure. If you work for a government agency and you're using your .gov email address and communicating with another .gov email address, that's probably actually pretty secure, for a variety of reasons. But, like, the industry standard, best in class for free email, is literally called PGP, Pretty Good Protection. Everyone knows that email is not really secureable. In terms of audio communication over a device, there are things that claim to be fully end-to-end encrypted, and basically the idea is that it's taking your audio, turning it into digital zeros and ones, which most things do at this point to go over a network, encrypting it. So anyone intercepting that transmission will not get anything that turns back into a comprehensible language when they try and put it back into speech. Gets to the destination, decrypts. I'm gonna tell you, you should probably be having your conversations that you really want to keep private over text message via Signal, or using my next recommendation. I will specifically counter-recommend WhatsApp. WhatsApp used to be the thing that everyone said, use this for your voice calls. It's fully end-to-end encrypted. No one can break it. Come back to that too. Facebook bought them. Meta bought them. Whatever. See previous conversation on how little I trust Meta. I would not trust WhatsApp at this point, despite somewhat older advice maybe telling you that you should be using it all the time. My real recommendation is to use coded language. Look, codes and ciphers have been around for a lot longer than modern computer-based cryptography. The fact of the matter is, if I'm having a conversation with a buddy on the phone about a party we're going to this weekend, and it's Super Bowl weekend, odds are people are not going to assume I'm talking about something other than a Super Bowl party. It's actually a protest. Who knew? Well, everyone who was in the room when we decided we're gonna not talk about this without using coded language, and we'll all tell people that it's gonna happen this weekend, but we're only gonna tell each other the location at this time over this, and everyone will show up together without anyone having the chance to leak this, and we have these conversations about what pub we're going to watch the game. Like, again, this is the kind of thing where using coded language, using non-specific phrases, using agreed-upon code phrases that you can slip into normal conversation, having the plain text of your message isn't helpful if the plain text doesn't actually say anything incriminating. So, obviously things like that start to not scale as well as they could. This is why people who do this on a professional basis have lots of different sets of coded language that they use with different operatives and different groups of people, so that even if one set is compromised, they can still continue operations with everyone else. We're not going that deep, but it's something to think about. there's also, you know what, I'm not gonna get into various methods of analog codes and cryptograms right now, because that happens to be a thing that I was very interested in for quite a while and have a reasonably large knowledge of, and we'd be here for a while without getting to the other and possibly more important stuff. If you're really curious, send me a message. Or if enough of you comment asking for it, maybe I'll do a special, fun, let's talk about analog cryptography. So, I think I made my point there. One of the other things that people are concerned with privacy for, and that I will get to before I get to a brief overview of metadata, and we'll see if I need a whole second class for it. Let's talk about internet browsing and privacy. There are a couple of general privacy recommendations for internet use. First, if you're logged in, it can be tied to you. If you are logged into Gmail, I do not care if you are using a VPN. I only kind of care if you're using Tor. I'll get to that in a second if you don't know what it is. You have logged in. Google is tracking everything. Facebook is tracking everything. Apple is tracking if you're logged into an account and that account is associated with an email address and that email address is associated with you, the person, assume that everything you do in that browsing session and any other one on that same device and browser, until you've logged out and cleared your cookies and your cache, is recorded. It's not private. Now, it's recorded and mostly fed into the data analysis programs rather than looked at by an individual person. But that's still an issue, and it's still not private, right? So, for the curious, by the way, the reason that a VPN isn't doing anything useful, and neither is Tor in that case, is because when you're logged in, you've literally created something called a session cookie. It's a little piece of code that's stored in your browser on your computer to say that this person is logged into Gmail on this device, or Facebook on this device, or whatever, right? There's also such a thing, and they almost always include these, as tracking cookies. These are used to track your activity on your browser. That's literally what they're for. You'll also see them called tracking pixels, Facebook pixels, all stuff like that. When the tracking is stored on your computer, all of your network privacy is irrelevant. It's just tracking it on your computer. A VPN is a tool for privacy from your internet service provider. Normally, a network request goes from you to your internet service provider with a packaging layer, basically saying, I want this to go to xkcd.com or EFFactor.org or whatever. And therefore your ISP knows that you went to go look at that website. This is called metadata. It's data about data. We're about to get into it a lot more. But it means that your internet service provider has a full list of what your account is looking up. If you're doing it on cellular data, your cell phone service provider has access to this. A VPN creates a cryptographically secure tunnel to a server somewhere else called the virtual private network. And your computer sends the request inside that tunnel. So all the ISP sees is they sent something to a VPN. They have no idea what it was. It then gets decrypted there, and the layer of send it out here is done. And so the VPN facility may keep logs. Some of them do, some of them don't. I'll have specific recommendations at the end here. Or possibly in class 2. Probably in class 2. Sorry. So VPNs are for privacy, specifically privacy from your internet service provider and your cellular data provider. If they don't know what you're looking at online, even if they're subpoenaed or even if they comply in advance, they can't tell anyone. So that's what a VPN is for. Tor, otherwise known as Tor browser, Tor is short for the onion router, is a totally different protocol for accessing the internet. It's not going over HTTP. You know what? I'm not even going to get into that. Basically, it is for anonymity. It means that no one knows what website you're looking at, or even that you are looking at something. Tor circuits, basically how this works is that they send information on basically there is no stage that knows everything that is necessary to know where the request came from and where the request is going. So no one has any ability to see that you are looking at anything. It also connects to dark web addresses. That is probably a story for another time. That's definitely a story from another time. So, to recap internet browsing and privacy. Your data itself, the information that you are sending to and from the web server may or may not be encrypted. But your internet service provider definitely knows that you went to that site. If you're using a VPN, they definitely know that you're using a VPN. There are some VPNs that try and use technology that masks VPN traffic as normal web traffic. Conversation for another time, probably, but they probably know that you're using a VPN. Tor is if you don't want anyone to know that you were looking at anything at all, much less what it is, basically. Again, don't log in to stuff. If you are going to log into stuff, have it be with an email account or a username that is not associated with you as a person or any of your other usernames or email accounts. Don't log into it at the same time as your other accounts. That can tie them together. I think because metadata is a very large topic, that is going to be it for class 1. I will be back with class 2 next week. If you are interested in more content like this, let us know in the comments below. Like and subscribe to be informed of upcoming content and everything we are putting out. If you visit our website, you can also sign up for various courses. You can join our Discord. You can find out about stuff in lots of ways. If you have questions or things that you think I am overlooking, other than the giant conversation about metadata, which I'm going to get into next time, let me know in the comments below or through one of those channels. With that, I'll see you next time.